800 pages on 2 volumes of the COVID inquiry report. It's cost you, the taxpayer, in the region of £200 million. So what do you get? Well, the Prime Minister says improvements have already been made before he even waited to see what it said. We're going to take you through the detail. And as Ashish was just saying, the headline here is about what would have happened had the government locked down earlier. Mandatory lockdown should have been imposed 1 week earlier, it says. Deaths in England in the first wave up until the 1st of July 2020 would then have been reduced by 48%, equating to approximately 23,000 fewer deaths. So the central question and the central criticism there was that if the government had got it together, had more reliable evidence, been able to make decisions in a cleaner, quicker way, then it could have saved that figure of 23,000 lives. So what went wrong? Well, the report goes through the failings both of Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister at the time, and the wider government. So here it says Mr Johnson's own failure to appreciate the urgency of the situation was due to his optimism that it being the pandemic, would amount to nothing. So the character of the Prime Minister is one of the key flaws that meant that lockdown didn't happen earlier, compounded, the report goes on, by misleading assurances that he received from the Cabinet Office and the Department of Health and Social Care that the pandemic planning was robust. So we're going to spend a bit of time working out who is responsible for claiming that the country was better prepared than it is. And here we get to it. We're going to talk about Christopher Wormald. He was the lead civil servant in the Department for Health and Social Care. But he matters now because he's now become Keir Starmer's top Mandarin of all. He's the Cabinet Secretary. So we're going to trace his role, given that pandemic planning wasn't sufficient. Now, the report says that Christopher Wormald is responsible, it was his responsibility to rectify the over-enthusiastic impression by Matt Hancock that he had given to number 10 Downing Street. But the inquiry has seen no evidence that he did and took such action. In other words, the lead civil servant in the health department, now the top Mandarin in the country, should have put the brakes on Matt Hancock's claim that everything was ready and everything was prepared. And here you can see they go in further. Mr Hancock's unjustified assurances to 10 Downing Street and the Cabinet Office that the Department for Health and Social Care was managing the crisis effectively, and that Sir Christopher Wormald's failure to rectify these assurances obscured the reality and the need for more action. That's a pretty damning indictment of Chris Wormald. Is the government going to directly address that? Keir Starmer's statement that you just heard did not say either way. I suspect they're going to try and tough it out and keep him in the post of Cabinet Secretary. But let's look at who else gets some of the blame. Chris Whitty and Patrick Vallance. Now, they were the two faces, scientist faces of the pandemic. Now, of course, Patrick Vallance matters because he's become a Labour minister in Keir Starmer's government. But it says here that the public wouldn't maintain, that these two worried that the public wouldn't maintain compliance with restrictions over a long period. Early on in the pandemic, you'll remember, there wasn't a lockdown because the scientists didn't think that people would obey it. Then this is the key bit. This concept of behavioural fatigue had no great grounding in behavioural science and proved damaging given the imperative to act more decisively and sooner. In other words, the key science minister did not rely on behavioural science when coming up with behavioural recommendations. That feels quite damning. Is the government going to do anything about him? Well, we'll wait and see, but the statement from the Prime Minister does not address that. But look, a pandemic is hugely complicated. There are massive tensions. And can a report like this actually make suggestions that are practical and helpful and lead to change? Well, it suggests, I've read the conclusions, and they suggest quite broad brush things like this. Leaders must work constructively within their governments and across the 4 nations. Political differences should not be a consideration at a time of national emergency. And I think this bit shows the danger of an expensive report like this. I mean, isn't that motherhood and apple pie? Which leader wouldn't say that they wanted to work constructively and effectively and at pace? Key recommendations of this report, but every politician thinks they do that. So some things that are identified in this report, but it's cost a lot of money. A lot of them were known at the time, and it's not clear that the recommendations are going to change a lot. The families will be happy, but is there going to be true accountability? We'll only find that out in the coming days.